Special session of January 26, 2015. If you please silence or shut off your cell phone. And we always start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you please join us. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Morning, George.
Okay, so special session, we have just one item, and that's audit presentation. So, George, were you going to kick off, or?
Your agents are. There's along for eye candy today. Sorry.
We are
You don't need me
filming
here.
this, and this will be out on the net, so.
But I do appreciate it.
So do you guys have the copies of your letters and audit and all that fun stuff with you? The first letter I kind of want to just briefly touch is the letter that the first bold part says our responsibility in relation to the financial statement audit. This is just kind of a form letter that we do every year. It's called what we call the SAS 14 letter. So it basically just kind of goes through our audit procedures and that kind of stuff. I know you guys have seen this a few times, so I won't go over it too much. We didn't have to report any misstatements in this letter or any significant issues, anything like that, so I just want to go over that. The next letter is probably the one that you're want to learn a little bit more about. This is our management letter, and I think we went over some of this stuff already when we did the exit interview during the audit process. So the very first paragraph is just our normal thing. It says that we look at internal controls, we don't provide an opinion, we don't necessarily look at everything. The first bold section starts with internal control policies and procedures. So as we're going through internal controls, we just noticed a few things that we would like to see a little bit of improvement on. You guys have worked really hard to have a strong internal control structure and continue to monitor, which is a very good thing. But there were just a couple things that we had noted. The first, as we continue to note, we just want to keep you aware that there is a little lack of segregation of duties in payroll and accounts payable, though we do believe that there is some oversight of this. So at this moment, we think it's fine, but if personal changes occur, you want to look at that real closely as that happens. So we did note that the Justin journal entries that we recommended to be reviewed last year have been done. And so we are very pleased to see that. We just wanted to make that comment. Time card approvals. We still are having issues with time cards. We tested 71 time cards, and out of those, 14 of them, which is 20%, were either missing approval or were self-approved by a department head. It's kind of, if you approve your own time card, we don't count it as approval. And so, and out of 14 missing, 7 was the sheriff's department. So it could have just been one. We try to test them all throughout different months and that kind of thing. So it's just something that we would like to see a little bit stronger controls over.
Nikki can provide us with the people we need to talk to.
Yeah. And then she's got some teeth that way. Another thing that we would have you consider is just changing the format of the time cards in order to track allocations of different funds and programs, such as if they're coded to 2 different programs, like in public health and mental health, or if they have a grant, because with the new single audit changes, they are really getting particular about the time allocations, and so they want to make sure that is appropriate, and so that's just something to consider as that goes. The bank reconciliations. On some of the bank account reconciliations, we didn't see anybody besides the person doing the bank recs approving them. However, we did note that the June bank reconciliation was, and so that's something I think we had talked about before it was done, and so it looks like it's already been implemented, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, the last 2 things have been, you talked about the, what was the one you talked about?
The time cards.
The budget line items.
Mhm.
We're doing that,
Okay.
so
So it's like.
if it requires a change, if it's not within the same category, then
Who's
getting
going to be
department head approval, so.
reviewing the bank reconciliation? Is it done
Barb does them, and then Stacy Hay reconciles the accounts that we are signers on.
So you're always having two people within every account at least, and that's what's important. So the other thing that we noticed is we were doing some accounts payable testing, that there were times that there were some errors on it, and so sometimes it was a very time-consuming process for the accounts payable clerk to have to go to each department and get approvals. Which in our opinion, you should be able to change the line items within a budget category, because that's what the department head's responsible over, such as materials and services. As long as it stays within that line, then the accounts payable should be able to fix it in order to track it correctly. But if it's within a different, like if it's moved to capital outlay, for instance, or from capital outlay, that's something that a department head needs to approve, we believe. So it would give a little bit of flexibility for the clerk, but that way they still would have control over their own budgets, each department head.
So whenever we do change a line item, do we let the department head know that? change line
I
items?
let them know if I change, the line item in its entirety, which would be from a completely different fund and the category as far as capital versus non-capital expenditures. If it's there's for instance, 1936 and a 1903 that are copier maintenance versus copier lease, and sometimes they just get them backwards, and I've not notified someone if I change those last four numbers. Unless it's a repetitive, like they do it all the time, and then I'll say, hey, these aren't the right four numbers.
It'd be pretty easy to actually put two capital.
Yeah, but if it's a capital, they wanna spend capital funds, but it's not really capital, then Ann and I go over that with them and, change without talking to them.
The last comment we had on internal control is just that just to keep making sure that anytime you do an internal control procedure, just so there's some sort of evidence so we can actually see it. Otherwise, it's hard for us to come in and say, oh, they said they did this, but didn't. So just to ensure that if you look at something, you initial it, so we know also. So we can follow up on it later. So that kind of covers our internal control section. The last section of the letter, we are required as auditors to come in and we have to have a different surprise test every year. And so something that we decided to do this year is we picked on one department. So we just picked the department and we looked at most all of the expenditures for the year, just besides payroll. And so we took a very narrow scope, and so we looked at a lot of them that way. And so then there was a few things that we did note, which are listed in this letter here, that they just didn't have enough documentation, or maybe just didn't have an explanation. We're not saying that they're not valid purchases or anything like that. It just, we didn't have a whole lot of explanation on it. So it was hard for us to tell what it was. And so we just noticed, those four items on the letter, just ones that stuck out a little bit as not having enough documentation, that kind of thing.
Well, the last one, purchase of Christmas decoration, that should be self-explanatory.
But it was after Christmas.
Oh.
It was for
December 30th.
December 30th. And $166 for Christmas decoration.
That's a plan in the head.
And it could
They were on
possibly
sale.
not.
There you go.
Got
They
the
were on
sales or
sale,
something.
so they got them for me. One thing I wanted to comment on is this one back here about the allocations when people are working in different programs. We were talking to Jay before you guys came in here about our peer review. And our peer review is every 3 years, our audit work is peer reviewed by another audit firm to see that we're meeting the standards and so forth. And one of the things that we had as a pretty significant criticism, the last one, which was 2 years ago, is that our documentation, even though we believe that we did the work to make the right conclusion about our audit, our opinion was correct. It's just that our documentation was insufficient in how we built up our documentation to reach the conclusion that we did. We feel that we know that we made the right conclusion, but it just didn't show in our the documentation, our paperwork. The same is if you were to have a separate federal audit and you didn't have sufficient documentation showing the breakdown between programs, you're going to get dinged for it. Absolutely. And So that's just an admonition that the federal audit requirements, like Carrie said, are just getting more strict all the time.
Which I feel like for the, public health does an outstanding job with this. Public health's time cards are, listed by every department they have, program they have.
You have to
whatever
hand
grants
enter
from-
every employee
Yeah.
by the hour,
So I think where
and
we
salary allocation.
tend to, to change that process is when we, through the budget process or through management decisions, decide that someone's allocated 50% in the budget here and 50% over here. We've done that through the budget, not necessarily showing it on a time card. There's just been a decision made based on their duties and time spent in the past that that's how we're gonna allocate. Well, their time card doesn't show that. We've chose to do that in the budget. And so that's where, is our budget decision and our discussion there enough documentation? Or do we really have to go that next step and have a time card reflect that too? We'll talk to auditors a little bit more about that scenario.
Question back to the, you talked to you of one particular department. All the things that are here are allowable expenses, it just needs better documentation.
You know, we didn't see anything like purchasing alcohol or anything like that, it's not allowable.
Okay. So if Board of Commissioners thought that some of these things are dollars that county shouldn't be spending for, we can address that through policy, but from auditing standpoint, these are allowable expenditures.
Yeah, because we're not doing like illegal on it or anything like that, so.
And these all had receipts with them, they just didn't have an explanation,
Purpose.
purpose.
The one receipt we didn't have was for the Best Buy, which was on a tablet.
Third one down.
Yeah, there's
The rest of them
substantial
we had
on there with
receipts.
no receipt.
Purchase
Yeah, just as a purchase order, there's nothing
Was
showing.
it with a, credit card?
I don't know. I can check on that.
I'm gonna, I'll look at it too, because I'm pretty forceful with him.
That kind of a purchase is covered through the IT
Yes.
purchase policy.
That's possible too, that it was purchased through a different department.
It wasn't purchased through.
It was through the district attorney's, through the 106 fund.
Okay.
I'll check on it.
Yeah, 'cause that would be a policy thing, but we were just gonna be, that's what, being comfortable with application of it.
Thank you.
You know, like the in-town lunch, I know we had it, there was an ESD like 3 or 4 years back that got in big trouble for certain things, and one of them was a lot of in-town lunches where they didn't need to necessarily go to a restaurant, but district didn't need to pay for that kind of a thing. We came in and audited that ESD, ultimately shut down,
The Union Bakery EST.
was it even big, I think it was. But they had a lot of in-town stuff that they couldn't necessarily substantiate the reason why they had to go out and eat in town, because a lot of the travel they look at is more for out of town, that kind of stuff, so that's just something that, yeah, more documentation is a great thing.
So this is something we want to have, we want to have some policy discussion with the commissioners and the auditors, travel reimbursement and especially in-town meals, food, period. There's a lot of gray area there. There's some IRS rules that need to be taken into consideration. The auditors, and then our own policy, what do we allow, what are we willing to pay for, so.
Good. Sounds like a good staff meeting discussion to me.
One example being the mental health advisory committee meets at lunch, looking at the mental health committee, provide pizza or something, because it is for lunch.
That's the advisory group, so a little bit different, I think, than, but that's just something that could be considered in your policy.
We'll work on that.
Yeah.
Have anything else?
I want to, one other thing on this letter before we leave it. I just want to make sure we're all thinking the same thing at the very bottom of page 1, that we had this discussion and Nikki's been given direction that if she's changing those line items, let the department head know. The auditors are saying she doesn't have to do that if it's within the same budget category. So is that what we're hearing? Okay to make those changes within materials and services?
That's what it says, and it says it's okay, but I would think that the right thing to do is to keep communications with the other department heads and say, I've changed it from line item to line item within category. It just seems like the right thing to do to me to keep.
And that's the way we interpreted your direction, right? So,
By audit, you don't have to, but by
but at the same time,
operations here, it's just, it feels like the right thing to do to me.
all right, so that we can have that discussion later too, so. Want to make sure we understood what you were saying.
Yeah, different category, whole different thing. but line
And
item.
still, I guess I need to clarify, you are indicating in this information that it would be okay for me to change those last 4 digits. You are telling me, asking me to change them, but to notify the department head regardless of whether it's out of that category or not.
You know, I'm just one that tells every department head to own their budget, to know their budget. And so I can't speak for them, but I would think if we asked the department heads, as a general rule, they would want to know. It's not for me to say that every department head would be the same as me, but if I was doing that budget, I would want to get a couple of department heads here.
Well, it makes sense to do it rather than, 2 years from now, they find out, well, I haven't said anything about the last 17 times I did it.
That's not the case. I tell them, they just continue to do it.
So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, a couple things become pretty apparent to me. That seemed like a pretty simple thing for department heads to get them right. The other thing, it's very irritating that time cards should be pretty simple to get right. And I think a lot of that's communication, so that's just me.
On the time cards, we need to talk to the communicator.
Department heads need to do them right.
It has to come from someone other than you.
We
Absolutely.
pointed out the sheriff's department here being 20% of those, but really they're 20% of the employees, so that's a proportional number.
And then actually they're way better. Way better than, I haven't gotten any yet with the new person, but before they were way better. So.
Good.
Well,
Any other questions about the letter?
we had Rick here. Anything on the work department? You get a star on it, Rick.
Awesome.
I'm sure my department will be the one targeted next year.
I wish all departments
Every
would
year.
come to the audit.
It feels like every year.
Well, I've been down there for a couple of years, Rick. Maybe I need to come back down here.
I missed you
spend a
last
couple of
year.
days at the road department.
And you missed that little talk that we have every year.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, you took note of the discussions, and there's thus not a need anymore.
All right, so what we need to do today, we need to officially accept this, George.
I think that's pretty standard, yes.
Good, standard. You usually want money or something too, don't
I'm sure we've already asked for that.
you? Oh. So what we need is, I would entertain a motion to accept the audit for 2014.
I so moved, that we accept the audit of 2014.
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the audit for 2014 done by Oster Professional Group. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Chair votes aye, motion carries. With that, we're adjourned at